All right, so today we're going deep on something pretty intense. We're talking about the potential for World War III.
Yeah, definitely a heavy topic.
Yeah, but before anyone panics and starts stocking up on canned goods, the point here isn't to scare anyone.
Right.
It's to really explore what this Italian analysis World War III prediction is saying about, the paths we could be headed down, and most importantly, how we might avoid those paths.
Yeah, and what I found really fascinating about this analysis is that it doesn't just focus on, traditional military stuff.
Right.
It dives into things like climate change, resource competition, the rise of AI, autonomous weapons, that kind of thing.
Yeah, all those interconnected challenges that are like adding fuel to the fire, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The analysis starts by describing our current global situation as a multipolar world. Basically, power isn't concentrated in one place anymore. It's spread out among several major players.
Like the US, China, Russia, those big guys.
Exactly. And the analysis argues that this multipolarity, it creates inherent instability, kind of like a seesaw with, multiple people constantly shifting their weight, making it hard to find a balance.
And it seems like all these other issues like climate change, resource scarcity, economic inequality, they just make that seesaw even more wobbly.
Precisely. The analysis gives the example of climate change, displacing millions due to rising sea levels in a place like Bangladesh, for instance. That could lead to mass migration and potential conflict with neighboring countries like India. And then you add in the competition for dwindling resources, things like water, rare earth minerals. It's a recipe for, well, friction.
Yeah, so it's not just about tanks and missiles anymore. It's about these global challenges creating this like tinderbox-like situation.
Exactly. And the analysis actually goes on to identify 4 specific flashpoints.
Oh, okay, so like regions where these tensions could actually boil over.
Yeah, regions where all these underlying factors could erupt into open conflict.
Got it. Okay, so let's go through those flashpoints. First up, it looks like we have the Taiwan-China situation, a potential conflict there that could draw in global superpowers. Can you give us a bit more context on that?
Sure. So the analysis points to China's long-standing claim on Taiwan as a breakaway province and the possibility of them using military force to try and assert control, which of course would likely trigger a response from the U.S., which has pledged to support Taiwan's defense.
Right, because that whole situation is a bit of a powder keg.
Yeah, and what makes it even more volatile is the potential global economic impact.
Oh, right, because Taiwan's like a major player in the tech world.
Exactly. They're a huge producer of microchips. Those are essential for, well, everything these days. Smartphones, computers, even military equipment.
So if there was a conflict there, it wouldn't just be a military crisis, it would be an economic earthquake.
Exactly. Now, moving on to another potential flashpoint, we have the Arctic.
Ah, the Arctic. A region that's literally changing before our eyes because of climate change.
Absolutely. As the ice melts, it's opening up new shipping routes, giving access to valuable resources, which is leading to, territorial disputes.
Oh, so like who gets to control these newly accessible areas?
Exactly. We're talking countries like Russia, the U.S., Canada, even Norway.
And of course, Russia's been pretty assertive in that region lately.
Yeah, the analysis definitely points to Russia's increasing military presence up there as a potential source of tension.
It's almost like a 21st century gold rush, but with nuclear icebreakers and cutting-edge military tech instead of pickaxes.
A chilling thought, for sure. And it's not just about physical territory either. The analysis also talks about the growing threat of cyber warfare and how AI could, really change how wars are fought in the future.
Yeah, that's a whole other level of scary.
Right. Imagine a large-scale cyber attack that just cripples a nation's infrastructure, shuts down power grids, financial systems, communication networks. Everything.
It's like a modern-day siege, but instead of surrounding a city with troops, you're holding an entire country hostage through digital means.
Exactly. And the analysis argues that in a world so reliant on technology, a cyber attack could actually be more devastating than a traditional bombing raid.
Wow.
It could create widespread chaos, undermine people's trust in the government, and even, trigger a military response, even if it's not clear who launched the attack in the first place.
So the lines between physical and digital warfare are getting really blurry, and the potential for like miscalculation and things spiraling out of control is pretty high.
Absolutely. And that brings us to our final flashpoint, the Middle East.
Ah, the Middle East, a region with a long and complicated history of conflict, to say the least.
Yeah, it seems like even the smallest incident there could set off a chain reaction.
So what's the analysis focusing on in that region?
Well, it talks about the chronic instability there, fueled by things like the rivalry between Iran and Israel, the involvement of outside powers, and just the sheer number of armed groups operating in the region.
Right, it's like a powder keg that's been smoldering for decades.
Exactly. And the analysis suggests that any escalation in tensions, whether it's a border skirmish, a targeted assassination, a terrorist attack, anything like that, could quickly draw in global powers and escalate into a wider conflict.
Okay, so we've got these four incredibly volatile flashpoints, each with their own set of risks and triggers. But who are the key players in this potential World War III scenario? Like, if things were to actually boil over, who would be on which side?
Well, it's not as simple as drawing lines in the sand anymore. The analysis points out that while we still have, traditional alliances like the US and NATO, there are internal divisions within those blocs that could weaken their response to a major crisis.
So even those seemingly solid alliances might not hold up under the pressure of a global conflict.
Exactly. And then on the other side, you have China, which is actively working to expand its influence. Through things like the Belt and Road Initiative, for example, they're forging new alliances and potentially creating a whole new power bloc to challenge the existing world order.
It's like watching the pieces on a global chessboard being rearranged,
Yeah.
with new alliances forming and old ones potentially breaking apart.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex and constantly shifting landscape. And then, of course, there's the wild card.
Ah, yes, the wild card. Those groups that don't really play by the traditional rules. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. So the analysis is talking about non-state actors, things like terrorist groups, private militias, even corporations. These groups could leverage advanced technologies, like AI and cyber warfare, to disrupt the balance of power.
So they might not have armies and tanks, but they could still cause a lot of chaos.
Exactly. They could launch devastating cyber attacks, deploy autonomous weapon systems, use sophisticated propaganda techniques to, sow discord and destabilize entire regions. It's a whole new dimension to warfare that adds even more uncertainty to the equation.
So we've got our players, our flashpoints, and now I think it's time to talk about the game changer, so to speak,
Sure.
technology. This analysis really emphasizes how advancements in technology could completely reshape the face of war. And it's not just about bigger bombs, right?
Oh, absolutely not. The source highlights autonomous drones and robots, for example. Imagine swarms of unmanned vehicles fighting without direct human control, making decisions based on algorithms and sensor data.
Yeah, that sounds straight out of science fiction. It's both fascinating and terrifying at the same time.
Absolutely. And then there are the cyber weapons we discussed earlier. Disabling a nation's infrastructure could be far more devastating than any traditional weapon.
It's almost like we're moving towards a world where the most powerful weapons aren't physical but digital, where the battlefield isn't a geographical location, but the interconnected networks that, make modern society function.
Precisely. And then there's AI, which the analysis points out is a bit of a double-edged sword.
Oh, how so?
Well, on the one hand, it could be used for strategic prediction, for coordinating complex military operations, for making faster and more informed decisions. It could really give a country an edge in a conflict.
So it's not just about who has the biggest guns anymore. It's about who has the smartest algorithms.
Exactly. But the flip side is that AI could also be used for more nefarious purposes. Things like propaganda, manipulating public opinion, creating deep fakes to sow chaos and distrust. It could even be used to develop autonomous weapon systems that operate entirely without human oversight.
And that raises a whole host of ethical and practical concerns.
Absolutely. And then, of course, looming over all of this is the nuclear threat, which we can't forget about.
The big one.
Yeah. The analysis talks about the terrifying potential of even tactical nuclear weapons, which are smaller yield devices designed for use on the battlefield. And of course, there's always the risk of escalation, a limited conflict spiraling into a full-blown nuclear exchange.
Yeah, that's the ultimate nightmare scenario. So with all these factors in play, all these interconnected challenges and emerging technologies, what kind of picture does the analysis paint of what a global conflict could look like? Is there any room for optimism, or are we headed towards a really bleak future?
Well, the analysis definitely doesn't sugarcoat the potential consequences of a global war. It's a pretty sobering assessment.
Okay, well, let's dive into those consequences then. What does the analysis suggest could happen if things really go south?
It paints a grim picture, to be honest. We're talking about potentially millions, even billions of lives lost. Massive displacement of populations, entire cities reduced to rubble, the global economy in ruins. And that's not even considering the long-term environmental consequences, the potential for nuclear winter, the further acceleration of the climate crisis. It's a very disturbing vision of the future.
It's a lot to take in, that's for sure. But amidst all this potential for destruction and chaos, does the analysis offer any glimmer of hope? Are there any potential solutions or paths forward that could help us avoid this catastrophic outcome?
Thankfully, yes. It does offer some solutions, and I think they're worth exploring in more detail. Well, the analysis really emphasizes this need for like a new era of diplomacy.
Okay, so not just the kind of diplomatic efforts we've seen, kind of failing over and over again.
Right, exactly. It argues that international institutions, like the UN, they need to be empowered to actually mediate and resolve conflicts, not just like serve as platforms for discussion.
So it's not just about talking the talk, it's about walking the walk, actually being able to enforce agreements and things like that.
Exactly. The analysis suggests these institutions need like more authority, more resources to actually enforce agreements, hold bad actors accountable, even, intervene in conflicts before they escalate to like a global scale.
Yeah, that makes sense in theory, but wouldn't that require, a pretty big shift in how the world works? Like, are nations really going to be willing to give up some of their sovereignty to these international bodies?
It definitely wouldn't be easy, but the analysis points to historical examples like, the creation of the European Union, where nations that had been fighting for centuries were able to, overcome their differences for a common goal. It argues that in the face of an existential threat, like, a global war, the motivation for cooperation might be stronger than ever.
Fingers crossed on that one. But even with stronger diplomacy, it seems like, with technology developing so rapidly, especially in areas like AI and cyber warfare, it's going to be really hard to prevent those tools from being used for bad stuff.
Yeah, that's a valid point. And that's actually why the analysis also highlights the urgent need for global agreements to regulate the development and use of these dangerous technologies.
So are we talking about something like a digital Geneva Convention, some kind of rules of the road for cyber warfare and the use of AI in conflict?
Precisely. It's a tough challenge, especially given how quickly these technologies are changing and evolving.
Hmm.
But the analysis argues that if we don't start establishing some international norms and regulations now, we're just setting ourselves up for, unintended consequences, miscalculations, and potentially even catastrophic escalation.
It's like we're giving everyone these incredibly powerful tools without any safety manual or guidelines on how to use them responsibly.
A recipe for disaster, you could say. Now, here's where the analysis gets really interesting. It proposes a third solution that might surprise you. Climate cooperation.
Wait, hold on. What? How does tackling climate change help prevent World War III?
Yeah, it might seem a little counterintuitive, but the analysis argues that addressing the climate crisis could actually foster, global unity and cooperation. It would force nations to work together towards a common goal, pooling their resources and expertise to solve a problem that affects every single person on the planet.
So by fighting a common enemy, climate change,
Right.
we might actually end up bridging divides and building stronger relationships between nations.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of these global challenges, how climate change worsens resource scarcity, fuels migration, and creates instability that can lead to conflict. By working together to solve the climate crisis, we might not only avoid environmental disaster, but also create, a more peaceful and cooperative world in the process.
It's a nice thought, a reminder that even in the face of all these, scary challenges, there's still potential for positive change. But even if we manage to avoid a full-blown World War III, it seems like we're still facing a future that's pretty uncertain and potentially dangerous. Does the analysis give us any sense of how to navigate this complex and potentially volatile world?
Well, I wouldn't say it offers like a step-by-step roadmap, but I think it does provide some valuable insights into the forces at play. And it encourages us to, really think critically about the choices we're making, both individually and as a global community. The analysis reminds us that the future isn't like predetermined. It's something we create through our actions and decisions.
So it's like a call to action, a reminder that we're not just passive bystanders in all of this. We're active participants who can actually shape how things unfold.
Exactly. And that brings us back to, back to you, the listener.
Right. What are your thoughts on all of this? What stood out to you? What are your ideas on how we can navigate this complex and frankly, a pretty scary world?
This analysis raises a lot of important questions. It doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but it does highlight the need for, awareness, critical thinking, and a willingness to have these tough conversations.
Because awareness is, it's the first step towards action. And even seemingly small actions, when you multiply them by millions of people, can create a really powerful force for change. So what role can you play in promoting peace and preventing conflict?
Maybe it's supporting organizations working on, diplomacy and conflict resolution. Maybe it's getting involved in local initiatives addressing climate change or advocating for policies that promote, global cooperation. Or maybe it's just, having these conversations with your friends and family,
Yeah.
raising awareness, challenging assumptions, encouraging others to think critically about these complex issues.
Because the future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we create together through our choices, our actions, and our collective will to build a better world.
Well said. And with that, we're going to leave you with one final thought to ponder. The source we've been discussing, it focuses mainly on the potential for conflict between nations. What about the conflicts within nations?
Oh, that's a great point. We've been talking about these global flashpoints, but sometimes the most dangerous sparks, they ignite a lot closer to home.
Exactly. How might those internal divisions, those social and political fractures we see in many countries, how might those contribute to global instability and increase the risk of war? It's a question worth considering.
Yeah, it's kind of like sobering to think that maybe building a more peaceful world starts at home.
Yeah,
Not just with like big international agreements and things, but by addressing those internal divisions we see in so many places.
exactly. When societies are divided, when people feel like they don't have a voice or they're being treated unfairly, it creates this breeding ground for extremism,
Right.
instability, conflict. And those internal tensions, they can easily spill over borders
Yeah. Yeah.
and contribute to a global climate of insecurity.
So it's not just about focusing on what's happening out there, but also looking at ourselves. Like, how can we build a more peaceful and just world, starting in our own communities?
Precisely. Peace it's more than just the absence of war, right?
Right.
It's about creating a world where everyone has a chance to thrive,
Yeah.
where there's justice, equality, opportunity for all.
It's about creating those conditions. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a reminder that peace isn't something that can be like imposed from the top down. It's something we have to build from the ground up,
I agree.
through our own actions, through community engagement, through this collective commitment to making a better world.
Man, this deep dive into World War III has been a lot.
It's definitely been intense,
Eye-opening, thought-provoking.
for sure. But hopefully it hasn't left you feeling, totally overwhelmed or hopeless.
Yeah, hopefully it sparked a little curiosity,
Mm.
a desire to, learn more, maybe even get involved somehow.
Yeah, because, the future isn't set in stone.
Right.
We still have time to write a different story, and we all have a part to play in that.
Absolutely.
Whether it's, having these difficult conversations, supporting organizations working for peace and justice, or just being more aware of our own choices and actions, we can all contribute to a more peaceful, sustainable future.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with one last thought.
Okay.
The source we've been exploring, it focused mainly on the possibility of conflict between nations, right?
Right.
But what about a world without AY war? What would that even look like?
That's a big question.
It is. What if all the resources, all the energy that we put into preparing for war,
Mhm.
what if we put all of that into solving, global problems
Yeah.
like poverty, hunger, disease?
Related change.
Exactly. What if we could channel all our creativity, all our ingenuity into building a world where cooperation wins out over competition, where diplomacy trumps violence, where every human being has the chance to really thrive? That's a vision worth working towards, I think.
It definitely is. It reminds us that even though there are a lot of challenges ahead, the potential for positive change is still there. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
We'll be back next time with another exploration into the depths of knowledge and the power of ideas.